Would you stand for the reading of our teaching text? It comes as no surprise from Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 3. Also be teaching from Mark 8 today, but I'm going to save the reading of that for when we go through it in a few minutes. So, Exodus 20. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. This is the word of the Lord. You can be seated. So, if you've ever gone to counseling before, you know that the way it always starts is rarely how it continues. You go in with a presenting issue, but that's never really why you're there. And I've told this story before, but it still teases into where we're heading perfectly. So if this is a repeat, just enjoy it with me again. That the counselor just seems to poke and prod around in those early sessions until they land on the thing that begins to unlock the deeper parts of our humanity, until you become, against your preference, completely unraveled to this person who was a stranger a moment ago, and now you're spilling the deepest parts of your humanity. And a few years ago, when I started with Ted, this older, wiser pastor who had become a licensed counselor, I always told him, and I always told the others that, you're going to a counselor, yeah. But it's just for preventative maintenance reasons. I'm fine, but I want to take care of my soul in a way that you go in and take your car in for an oil change so the engine doesn't eventually blow up. I'm fine. So just help keep me fine, Ted. But here's what happened, and I'll spare you the longer version of that story, but the more we talked, the more he poked and prodded, and the more he found those places that began to unravel me and unlock those inner parts of my soul that I had kept compartmentalized away perfectly fine for years to that point. And what I discovered is that there are parts of my inner being that were all knotted up like a tightly wound rope. And I needed him and someone else, and I needed the Holy Spirit, not only to reveal those things to me, but I needed someone else's perspective to help me walk through the untangling of those areas in me. And I think the best summary for my journey, without telling you my counselor sessions, comes from the opening of Brennan Manning's book, Ruthless Trust. Have any of you read Brennan Manning before? Highly, highly recommend, where he talks about one of his encounters with his own spiritual director, where his spiritual director eventually said to him, and I quote, Brennan, you don't need any more insights into the faith. You've got enough insights about this Christian thing that could last you 300 years. The most urgent need in your life is to trust what you already believe. To trust what you already believe. I went into my relationship with Ted for preventative maintenance. I was fine. And then I quickly learned two things. I wasn't as fine as I thought, and I was like Brennan Manning. You need to learn to trust what you already believe. And here's my point. That for weeks, I have, to you guys, been channeling my inner Ted. I've been poking and prodding around your soul, around the things you and I are prone to setting up as idols in our hearts and loving with a disordered kind of love. Things like certainty and control and comfort and success, and even those 2 weeks on money, and you're still here. And by the way, our giving is up 32% through the first 11 weeks of this fiscal year compared to the first 11 weeks of last fiscal year. Yeah. Now, 32% on a small number, that's funny. So, but we're 6 weeks into this thing now, and it's time to go a little bit deeper. Remember on the first week of this, I showed you an image of the column of my house that had fallen in the yard during VBS. And I could show you the pictures and the cracks of the brick and the mortar and even the very heavily load-sustaining concrete bearing, I can't think of the word, concrete blocks, cinder blocks underneath that bricks. But the ultimate issue wasn't in that. It was something beneath the surface. Ultimately, our wrestling and our idolization of certainty, money, success, politics, whatever it is that we've touched on, those are ultimately just the presenting issues. They're just the presenting issues of a greater thing, of a deeper wound, of a deeper problem. And so today and next week, I think, we're going to wrap up this mini-series within Exodus that we've been on for a few weeks. And as we do that, I just want to invite you somewhere with me, like any good spiritual director would. I want to invite you inward, downward, rooted into those parts of you that maybe have felt touched on, maybe have become a little less knotted up, maybe become a little unwound in our time together, but you're still left saying, like, is this the root issue that I have going on? I want to call you towards what practitioners of the way of Jesus and counselors would just call interior examination. In the recovery world, this is kind of like step 4, where we're inviting you to make that fearless moral inventory of yourselves. And listen, this idea of interior examination, if that's a new concept, an old concept, where you're like, where does this come in Scripture? It's a deeply biblical idea. And I take you to David's prayer in Psalm 139, where he says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there's any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. And so, really vulnerably, and if this is like your first time or you're newer, and you're like, I have no context for where you've been in Exodus and all these weeks, you're welcome, and just check it out and see what God might do. But for those of you who've been on this journey, and we're like 8 weeks deep in this idolization and disordered loves conversation, I'm asking you now to do a very scary thing, which is to pray, Lord, would you show me for who I really am? And I know that sounds scary. And I know that sometimes things get buried for good reasons. And I know that that kind of inward exposure might feel like a step backwards for you. And some of you are like fight or flight, man. It is triggered, like chill out, bro. But I still want to invite you into that space inward. And here's why. Because if you and I, who are going to start to really trust what we believe, we have to go there. We don't need just more awareness of God, knowledge of God. Dare I even say powerful experiences in the Spirit together, all 4 of those things. But we can't go there without coming to a realization of who we are as we relate to God as well. For example, you just don't need to admit that you struggle with like an exaggerated desire for certainty. You need to get underneath that. Dig it up, see the root causes, the root reasons of what's going on in you that would cause you to do that. Underneath all of our presenting issues, underneath the things that are like idols in our hearts, is the self. It's you as you really are, as you actually are. And if you and I are going to walk this road towards God, towards His healing of you in the innermost parts, towards His call to you to reorient your life wholeheartedly, holistically, towards apprenticeship to Him, something that sustains you in this long walk towards Him, you need a life of interior examination, which simply put is a way of life that considers the realities of your inner world for the sake of your own flourishing in the way of Jesus and the call to love others well. The poet and modern day philosopher Ice Cube said it this way: you better check yourself before you On the other side of the theological spectrum is a guy named John Calvin. And he has a great statement on this, and he says this, that the knowledge of God and that of ourselves are inextricably, I added the word inextricable, sorry. They are connected. Without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God, and without knowledge of God, there is no knowledge of self. Socrates had his version, Plato had his version. All kinds of ancient philosophers and teachers of the way are getting to this point. To know God fully is to know yourself fully, and to know yourself fully is to know God fully. But when Ice Cube made that statement, he was not taking it as far as a practitioner like John Calvin meant when he said, know yourself. He wasn't talking about our presenting issues. He was talking about the deep-seated core condition that every single one of us wrestles with that leaks out in those kinds of presenting issues. And I'm going to use a word that I don't often say very much, and for some it'd be like, oh gosh, here we go. And for others you'd be like, yes, here we go. And for everyone else in between, let me frame it up, because that core condition that every single one of us share that we can't solve on our own, that leaks out into all kinds of unique, custom, personalized, experiential, surface sort of issues, is a core condition wrapped up in sin. And sin is a word that we still need to reclaim, because it is the only word big enough inside the church and outside the church to explain the fundamental problem that every single one of us has and the fundamental problem we see expressed in the world around us. If we don't go to this part of the conversation, I will have done a disservice as your pastor to talk about rooted issues without getting to the root of the issue. You tracking what I'm saying? Your disordered love of, my disordered love of something, my idolization of anything, a good thing, a bad thing, anything in between, an American thing, whatever that is, your idolization of anything is at its root a presenting issue of the sin you carry in your body and the sin that is celebrated in the world around us. I heard something the other day that makes me never want to eat bread again. Are you aware, and I think I've got the science right, if it's wrong, please correct me so I can eat bread again, that when mold appears on your bread, and it's visible, and some of you grew up in households where we don't waste nothing. You scrape that mold off, you throw away that one, you throw away, oh, that was genuine. You throw away that one piece of bread and you hold on to the loaf. Did you know, scientifically speaking, I hope I'm wrong, is that before the mold presents at the surface, there is a hidden universe, a hidden root system of mold just beneath the surface that is right there ready to spring up and attack your children's peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and your body. What looks like a mold spore is really the revelation of a much deeper problem. Any scientists in the room? Is that right? Did I hear that right? All right, you're all freaking out too. Here's my point. Oh, those were genuine gags. I worked hard not to gag, but those are here's my point. Sin acts like that in our hearts. We tend to focus on the idols that present, when underneath there is a invisible to us, culturally hidden, Christian avoided subject called sin. The idolatry that we struggle with isn't what that means then in your apprenticeship to Jesus, wherever you are on that, is that ultimately the presenting issues that you wrestle with have a far deeper hold on your hearts that Jesus would say, and we're about to see in Mark 8, has to be put to death, which means throw away all the bread. All of it ever. Never eat it again because you don't know what could happen. John Mark Comer. And what we need then, here's what we don't need, is just another casual religious program to participate to deal with our surface issues. We don't need just a nice Christianized commentary on politics like we did last week. We don't just need 7 steps to becoming more generous, and those are all gateways in. That's great, I'm for it, but what we ultimately need is a deep-seated healing of our inner soul, away and out of this thing called sin that is ultimately set free from us in Jesus, and then is also the thing you have to learn how to live the rest of your life. It is a paradox of epic proportions. In Jesus, you are ultimately set free once and instantaneously, however that happens. And then you spend the rest of your life learning how to live that freedom from the inside out. That's why we need this. It's why we need this. It's why we need one another. You have legitimate enemies to your soul. And one of them is that invisible mold. And when we're just bread beside the other loaves, we need someone from the outside to come and say, this has got to be rid of. This has got to be taken care of. There are good things in your life that when they become disordered and idolized because of the deeper things in you and lies, they fool us into thinking we have it together when we don't. And it's been a minute since we focused on this actual Exodus narrative. You notice that? But remember where they are. They're in the wilderness being stripped of every attachment, every disordered love. They're being rewired towards God, and God is handing them these commandments, not just as like this rule book to follow, as much as he's saying, here's some means by which your soul can be healed from the inside out. And fundamental to that journey is you are going to be tempted to make something good ultimate. They were physically free from their slavery in Egypt, but they weren't truly free. That's the journey we have in front of us. Which brings me to Mark 8, chapter 22. There's a lot going on. No, Mark 8, starting at verse 22. And there's a lot going on here. And I didn't read it earlier because I actually want to walk through it together in a little bit more story form and make some points as we go through. And it starts, if you're familiar, if you've already turned there, with a unique miracle in which Jesus heals a blind man in 2 stages. Verse 22, it says this. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and he led him outside the village. And when he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" The blind man looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. And then his eyes were opened and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And Jesus sent him home saying, "Don't even go into the village." So here's the progression. A blind man could not see at all. Jesus heals him, but he still has blurry, foggy vision. And then Jesus puts his hand on him again, and he goes from blurry vision to seeing perfectly. And the miracle here is not just a physical one. It's meant to reveal to us something of the reality of seeing with spiritual sight. Spiritual sight about seeing Jesus clearly and seeing ourselves clearly. Now, how do we know this miracle is symbolic of spiritual sight? It's because if you go back and read earlier in Mark 8, that's the exact conversation Jesus is having with his disciples as they're basically berating him about his feeding of the 5,000 just before. And he's like, didn't you see when I did what I did? Didn't you see the leftover loaves? Didn't you see the leftover fish? And he's challenging them. You don't even see clearly yet who I am and who you are and what is happening right in front of you. And so what happens next, we pick it up in verse 27. Jesus went on, and his disciples went on to the villages. They left that area, and they continued about their journey. They went around Caesarea Philippi, and on the way, he asked them, Jesus to his disciples, "Who do people say I am?" And they replied, "Well, some say you're John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He's like, cool, yeah, that fits with your imagination. But what about you? He personalizes it. He's asking them the question. Who do you say I am? And Peter, who's always first to put his hand in his mouth, and a strong-willed guy, Peter answered, he said, "You are the Christ, you are the Messiah." And then Jesus warned them again, like he did the blind man, not to tell anyone about him. Interesting reason why we'll come to in a moment. If you were to read all of Mark's narrative, let's get technical for a second, you would find this significant in that prior to this exchange between Jesus and his disciples, only God, and this is weird to say out loud in modern times, only God and demons had acknowledged Jesus for who he is. This is the first time in the book of Mark that a disciple of Jesus says who he is. And we're reading this later and we're like, yes, they're finally starting to get it. They see Jesus. And they do in part. Kind of like a blind man who sees but only in part. But read what happens next, verse 31. He then began to teach them. Jesus teaches them that the Son of Man, notice he's changing his language from Messiah the Christ to Son of Man. He's lowering himself. He says that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this. And then check what happened. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Now that word for rebuke there is the same word that you would see previously where like they rebuked the demons exorcism moment. Like we're on all the goofy stuff this morning. You're welcome. Welcome to church. That is strong language. But check this out. So Peter, the guy that can't figure out if he's going to ultimately even follow Jesus, goes back and forth. The uneducated fisherman, the guy with all the zeal and the heart, pulls Jesus aside and rebukes him when he's like, no. I'm the Son of Man. I'm coming to give my life. I'm going to be killed. I'm going to rise 3 days later. And then Jesus turning, verse 33, turning and seeing his disciples. Look at that language. He sees them as he's trying to get them to see him. Seeing his disciples, he turns it around. He's like, I rebuke you, Peter. And then he says, get behind me, Satan. Why? For you are not setting your mind. How many times have we talked about that, Liz? Set your mind, set your hope. Aim your life at something, someone. Whatever you aim your life at will determine who you become. For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Hold on. There's a lot that just happened. All that to say, just when we think Peter and the disciples are starting to see Jesus, apparently they didn't get it. They were not seeing. They had confessed Jesus as the Christ. This is the fulfillment of all of their people's history and hopes. This is the fulfillment of their scriptures and the prophecy. It is standing before them, and they confess with their mouth Jesus as Messiah. But their understanding, and dare I say, their motive of what they hoped in return for Jesus was not what Jesus had in mind. Kind of like a blind man who can see in part, but still need to see more clearly. Kind of like a delivered people in the wilderness who were delivered and were being called somewhere, but continue to build the idol to a different God while God is on the mountain with thunder and lightning, talking to Moses, giving them the 10 Commandments. There was a profound disconnect. And the disconnect was this, if you haven't seen it yet. They saw Jesus as someone he wasn't. They hoped Jesus to be someone he wasn't. They had to find him on their terms, their own desires, and their wants. There was a disconnect between who Jesus truly was and his story and what he was doing and in how the disciples saw him. What Jesus wanted to do, what was doing, and what the disciples wanted him to do were two very different things. And it's all wrapped up in this word, the Messiah. Jesus, you are the Messiah. Remember, I know we're being technical for a minute, but we've got to. That in this context, the Jewish people are under Roman occupation. They're an oppressed people. They have no say, they have no power, they have no governmental leadership at the top. They are being ravaged for their own money on their own lands. They are living beneath the wealth that they are producing. Like, they wanted then, because of that, when they wanted Jesus to be Messiah, they wanted something he wasn't offering. They wanted Jesus to be the one who would save their nation. They wanted Jesus to be the Messiah who would give them power. They wanted Jesus to be the Messiah who would make them rich and restore their wealth and their comforts that come with that. They wanted Jesus to be a Messiah who would draw the crowds together under the banner not of his kingdom he's bringing in, but under the banner of let's overthrow our oppressor together. They wanted Jesus to be a Messiah who would do all of that for them without demanding anything from them. Meaning that at the end of the day, they wanted all that. And then they wanted to go on continuing living their lives as they saw fit. That's what sin does when it produces the idolatry in your heart. And we all have it. Pick your flavor of the week. We've all got it. On the spectrum of experience and belief and politics in this room, we all have it. Which means we just have to ask, how are we like them? Is it possible for us to want the same things from Jesus without offering ourselves fully with clear eyes to Jesus? And if we're not careful, I'm trying to avoid so much commentary, because it makes me sound maybe a little self-righteous. Maybe I am. If we're not careful, this is very much the template of American Christianity. We can be quite passionate to find a political savior for our nation. We can do all kinds of things in pursuit of cultural power and status and fight the culture wars. We have created and we have literally exported a version of Christianity called the prosperity gospel that is not true. It's not real. It's at least, in the best sense, an exaggerated view of one side of the question. And hasn't it been par for the course lately in the church that we should do and must do whatever it takes to draw the crowds, often not to point to Jesus, but to dilute what it means to follow Jesus, to raise the weaponry in the name of Christianity against the others that we all see as the other side? So maybe it's not just these disciples who have that struggle. Maybe it's you and I. Maybe it's us. Maybe it's the culturally pervasive form of Christianity that we exist in as a formational ecosystem. But listen to what Jesus says next in verse 34. With all that said, it's almost as if we could go to coffee with Jesus and he would call us out for all of our idolatry. And then he would get real. And this is what he says to them. So calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but forfeit his soul? And what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Like, do you see it? Do you see it? Do you see who Jesus really is in light of this whole scene unfolding in front of us in Mark 8? Do you see then what it really means out of that and considering all that to follow Jesus? And here's where I'm reconnecting the threads, the presenting issue, the core issue, the sin that's in our hearts with this whole narrative of Mark 8. Let's tie it together. To see Jesus clearly, to see ourselves clearly, to actually and truly and gracefully and through the long haul of all this stuff, slowly, patiently with God and with one another, to really follow Jesus, to get underneath the presenting issues of our lives and get down beneath the idols in our hearts. It means that you and I have a deeper call, a deeper invitation, a more formational thing that God is calling us to than most of us have imagined is what the real invitation is, thought possible, and said it's worth it. There is a Christianized kind of clouding of our eyes and much of the church in the West. And we'll say it as bluntly as Jesus did. This is his language, not mine. Welcome to church. It means to follow Jesus, you die so you can live. And that's like so not popular a thing to say. And again, if you're like really new around here, like we are way down a long line of teachings to arrive here. So if you're like, whoa, chill, like we've got that. Respecter of the unique journeys that walked in. But to the rest of you, it means you die so you can live. That's shocking language. And it's easy to dismiss. It's easy to lessen. Well, certainly that's not what he meant in this area. It's certainly not what he means for me. It's certainly not like, yeah, I can see that for them or for this, but not for me and my stuff. Definitely not at the level of that knot that is all tied up inside of me that I thought I was going in for a preventative maintenance and I got an overhaul. To live, you have to die. That's what Jesus is saying. And what that means is like, in our way of following Jesus together, this isn't just like a little burden to carry. It's not just like a little extra weight on your hiking backpack that you can easily shed. It's when Jesus says, pick up your cross, he's talking to a world that knew that that was an instrument by which they killed people. This is imagery that it was meant to jar. It was meant to be jarring. I'm not trying to be a shock jock this morning, but he was trying to go down all the way underneath the things and say, like, to really follow me is to learn to die. Jesus was saying, which means, I want to be careful how this comes out. It means, well, let me put it in the imperative. I think what it means, and if this is wrong, Jesus correct it in people's hearts. Like, I think that's what it means, is that you cannot follow me and then hold on to your stuff. You can't follow me with clear eyes, full hearts, like the football coach from that show would say. You can't do that, but then be like, this is off limits, God. This is mine. For every single one of them. The gospel levels the playing field for every single one of us. That is not a statement of any single thing. Jesus was saying, you can't follow me and make peace with your idols. You can't follow me but actually value comfort more than following me. You can't follow me, but actually lean on your ability to provide more than you depend on me. Like you see the million scenarios that could go down that line of thinking. And I know that sounds crazy and extreme and countercultural, but that is what Jesus is saying to us. And I think what that means then is what he's saying to us as a church, as representative of his church, that we cannot follow Jesus with like this half-hearted, consumeristic, preference-driven, fire insurance-based, surfacey, nominal, numb, powerless version of faith that we give to ourselves and offer to the world. And if you can't do that for you, do it for your kids. If you're like, I don't know that I can ever get to the root of my stuff. One, I think Jesus can. Don't sell him short. And do the work. But what if in our own humanity as parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles, just caring people about the next generation, would be willing to lay down our idols, or at least let our children watch us struggle till death with the laying down of our idols so that they have a clearer pathway to following him. The invitation of Jesus was never to come and convert to this new religion I'm starting called Christianity. Not that those things are bad words. It was an invitation to follow. To follow Jesus means to come and die so that you can live, to put to death the flesh, to put to death your ego and pride, to put to death your disordered desires and idols and the emotional baggage attached to them, to put to death your obsessions and fixations and mine too on trivial, temporary, idealized versions of life that mirrors the values of the American dream more than they do than the kingdom of God. I don't know if you're picking up on what I'm putting down this morning. You're like, man, you are so intense lately. I am. And sweaty. And never going to eat bread again. But the burden in my heart, and the one you're probably feeling in the teaching lately and in the subtle changes to our gatherings and what you're picking up on at Foundations if you've been coming, is this, that I want to we want to be a canary in a coal mine that says, warning, danger is looming if we don't take this more seriously. The danger that has become normalized, and I would say it even goes so far as to say this is what success looks like, is that we've perpetuated a lie that says Christianity is a both and, where you can have your Jesus and your truth. You can have your Jesus and your life as you want it. That's not true. That's what Mark 8 is telling us. It's what Exodus 19 is telling us over and over and over again. And that is not graceless. That is not legalism. That is not fundamentalism. It is a loving way to shepherd you to say, the way to that is full of love and slowness and patience and friendship and relationship. But ultimately, let's play the same game around here. That every single one of us needs the gospel to so pervasively confront us with our humanity and our sin so that the hope that we have in Jesus means something to us. And it causes us to do the work that invites him into those spaces, that unravels us so we can change and mature and grow as people of love. At the end of the day, Jesus summarized every rule and regulation around that is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the end game, guys. It's not about being right. It's not about having the right ideas. It's not about defining every possible position we could define on every political, religious, philosophical, theological basis. The end game is, are we becoming people of love? When was the last time someone asked you or me or our church, what's that hope that you carry that seems different? When's the last time you were asked that in the mundane reality of your lived life? And if you've never been asked it, I don't say that to shame you, I just say, is it possible we've settled for a casual, temporal, trivial, surfacey, idolization-based, preference-driven, consumeristic, shallow religiosity when Jesus' invitation to you and I is to come and die so that we might really live and so that others might fully live. Galatians 2, I have been crucified with Christ, yet I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And now the life I now live in the body, I live by faith. Something greater than me. Something that doesn't have all the dots connected. I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So what if the life you've been truly longing for is found on the other side of letting go instead of striving? What if the life you've been longing for is to quit protecting yourself, hiding from yourself, and let shame make you invulnerable to the vulnerability, piercing love and grace and justice and mercy of God? What if the healing of your wounds is not found by you protecting them, but you laying yourself bare, like on an operating table, letting the great physician get in there and heal you? What if Americanized Christianity is like perpetually taking pills to treat the symptoms without ever asking the deeper questions? What would it mean to lay yourself bare before the God who wants to heal you ultimately? That's a question you have to answer. I can't answer it for you. I can't talk my way there. I can't joke my way there. I can't sweat my way there. I can't expertly break down anything. I can teach. We can teach. You can have relationships. But it is ultimately, it's your decision. And it's a question we have to wrestle with as a church. So let's connect that dot. Will we settle for a version of Christianity that is made in the image of the American dream? Or will we pursue a way of life together that looks like Jesus, no matter the cost, the discomfort, the inconvenience, how long it takes, and how resistant we find it at first? And can I lovingly press down one more thing? Zero response equals yes. Can I say, and this isn't a bad thing, this is a reality thing, okay? Sometimes we come to a moment like this and the question is like, but I don't know if I have the time. I don't know if I'm capable of going all in on something like this. And can I say, lovingly, you can. Because all of us do to something. And that's not meant to say that that thing you're all in on right now is bad or immoral. I don't want to say it. But if we as the church were to call, you know what, for a 3-month season, we're going to meet 4 nights a week to do intense spiritual formation with your kids, and we need everyone in, and we're going to study scripture, we're going to live in community, we're going to break bread together, we're going to do this thing. I know how culty that sounds and how intense that sounds and how like, whoa, that sounds. Can I say, myself included, my natural reaction would be like, heck no, I don't have time for that. But then I look at my calendar, and I'm like, wait a second. But I did give up 4 chunks of 2-hour blocks of time this week to my kids' sports, hobbies, lessons. They're not bad. They're wrong. I'm not trying to shame you. I'm just saying there's an actual question that we have to ask. And it's not that God isn't with you at the ball field, and it's not that God doesn't want you to grow. And I'm not like, it's not an anti. But the real question has to be, not can we go all in? The question is, will I go all in on this? And why are I not? And what's holding me back? And what vision do I have in front of me? And what sin has to be dealt with? And what things need healed from me to do that? Like we're just, oh gosh, I sound like a culture war. we're prone to wasting our lives on lesser things. Let's just not waste our lives. There's an urgency that we must feel. The research would say for parents, by the way, this brought me to tears on Tuesday, and I sent it to my brothers. The research would say that of all the time that you have with your children in the course of your lifetime, assuming you have a long life, and they have a long life, over 90% of it is lived in person in the first 18 years of your life, of their life. Which means we are wasting our time in these early years if we are not organizing our life around what matters the most. Because we tend to think that remaining 5 to 10% will solve the problems of the 90%. But can I just say that 90% is what sets the values, it sets the trajectory, it sets the priorities, it sets so many things. And that doesn't mean they're not a soul in their own way that God can work through and all that, but I'm just saying, in the sense that we have a limited time to steward this thing, what are we setting as the aim of our families and of our lives? Disordered desires, idolatry. So I guess my question really is, how are you going to spend your life? How are you going to spend your life? I just want to plead with you to refuse to settle for a casual, comfortable, cultural Christianity. I want to plead with you to swim against the current. I want to plead with you not to turn this into an extreme reaction that otherizes others, and we lose the grace and the love and the redemption in the heart of the gospel towards people that think differently, act differently, and people that are just not even like ready to take this level of a step. But I want to call you. I want to call you, to plead with you, to be finished and done with a form of Christianity that says, pray a prayer, go to church, live how you want, go to some conferences, and coast your way to heaven. I want to plead with you to wrestle with your sin, repent of it, see the utter depths of it and your utter need for Jesus, and then learn how to crucify that sin daily through the grace and the power of Jesus' finished work on the cross. Look, set your hope, set your aim on greater things. Would you just go ahead and stand? So Eliza and the girls are out of town today. They went to Lewisburg to do some fall fun stuff with that side of the family, and it enabled me to get up a little bit earlier. And when I got up, there were other beautiful children vying for my attention. So I got up earlier, and I was able to have a slower morning, and came here earlier. And I was driving in, and it was a beautiful morning. I'm sure many of you were up and you saw the sunrise this morning. Just incredibly beautiful. And there was this juxtaposition on this contrast, these two things together, coming down the interstate, getting ready to get off just right over here. And above the horizon of the trees is this bright, big, round, orange sun with the cascading beams and the beauty and the early morning. And then just underneath it, down the road and above those trees, is just a low-laying fogginess. There's fog. And you know how this works, the fog that settles kind of gets burnt up, in a sense, by the light and the heat of the sun. I just had this thought, like maybe this is an illustration to wrap this up today, is that in this interior examination that God is calling us to, that will change the trajectory of our lives and of our church, is to wrestle with is there internal fog that you live with that is post-deliverance, but it's in the wilderness with you? And that fog, whatever it is, intellectual questions, hurts, different beliefs, pain, trauma, my granny side would say just straight up laziness, like apathy, complacency, whatever that fog is, the invitation is to get that second touch from Jesus that lifts the fog and clears the eyes of your heart, eyes of your mind, the eyes of spiritual sight that help you re-envision life. So Jesus, that's what we're asking. A lot of words today landed in however it landed with people, with your people. But Jesus, for those that have yet to take that step that would say, no, I need that first, that ultimate healing of sin that only comes from the salvation of Jesus, would you help folks take that step today to repent and to believe and to confess you are Lord and you're ushering in a kingdom that we want to be part of. And Jesus, for others, they're like, I've had that in my past, but I feel stuck in this foggy space between life, how I see Jesus say, and the life that I'm living. I don't live with clarity and eyes, and maybe I've settled for less, and maybe I feel conviction today, but I don't know how to follow it up tomorrow. Jesus, would you speak? Would you anchor them to someone? Would you bring them to your word and to your hope, and that we set you as our hope today? And Jesus, would you do this work, not just individually, but for us as a body, that we would become a church that loves at every point of the journey, and I mean that hardcore, like loves and is grace-filled and slow and relational, but doesn't settle for less than what you are calling. Jesus, you bid us come and die so that we can have life. That is only possible through you, through your cross, through the power of the resurrection. We cling to it this morning. Jesus, as we sing, meet us as we are. Take us where we need to go and heal us from the things that we need healed of. So let's sing together.